party rental company called to confirm where they should unload 72 chairs at my workshop. I hadn't ordered anything. The employee gave me my brother Mason's name and said he'd listed my property as the venue for his engagement party. I told her not to deliver there and texted Mason that the shop wasn't available. He called confused. "What do you mean? We had Dad's retirement dinner there. 72 invitations were already out. I mean, I'm not hosting your engagement party." There was a pause. Then Mason said, "Since when?" That question threw me more than I expected. I said, "Since always, I guess. You never asked me. We've had parties there before. We had Dad's retirement dinner there." "Exactly. I hosted Dad's retirement dinner." Mason went quiet again, and I could tell he genuinely did not understand why I thought those were different statements. His engagement party was less than 2 weeks away. Chloe's family had already been invited. The rental company had my address. So did the company handling a few decorations, and apparently the invitation itself said the party was being held at Owen's workshop. Mason hadn't hidden any of it from me. He genuinely seemed to think asking me wasn't necessary. He said, "I thought that was kind of our family place for stuff like this." "It isn't. You've literally had family stuff there, because I invited people." He sighed, then he said, "Okay, but what am I supposed to do now?" I didn't have an answer for him. The rental employee had already told me he could change the delivery address. If he waited too long, there might be a rerouting or scheduling fee, but there was still time, so I gave him the only answer I had. "Find a venue and update the vendors." He said, "That's easy for you to say." I know. That didn't help. Mason ended the call angry. I wasn't exactly calm either. My workshop sits behind my house on the far side of the driveway. It's a detached building I started improving about 6 years ago when my furniture side work became more than the occasional bookshelf for a neighbor. I build custom pieces and built-ins outside my regular job. Nothing huge, but enough that I have paying customers and schedules I have to keep. The shop has workbenches running along one wall, lumber racks, a finishing area, dust collection, stationary tools, cords, clamps, hardware, and whatever half-completed job happens to be in front of me that week. At that point, I had 2 dining chairs waiting for final sanding, part of a built-in cabinet spread across one bench, and lumber stacked for a customer project I was starting next. It wasn't some pristine studio people toured with wine glasses. It was where I worked. The reason Mason saw it differently went back 3 years. When our dad retired, I offered to host dinner there. There were fewer than 20 of us. I moved 2 work tables, pushed some equipment against the wall, covered what needed covering, cleaned the floor, and set up a few folding tables. I cooked outside. People ate in the shop. Dad loved it. Everyone was gone relatively early, and I spent part of the next morning putting everything back. Mason had helped me move one of the tables that day. Apparently what I remembered as, "I cleared my shop and hosted Dad's dinner," Mason remembered as, "We use Owen's shop for family parties." He wasn't completely inventing that idea. That was what made the argument irritating instead of simple. Mason had been in the shop plenty of times. He'd helped me unload lumber. I'd let him borrow my utility trailer before. When he needed to fix a lawn mower once, I told him to bring it over and use one of my benches. He knew the building had room. He knew there was parking. He had seen people eat dinner there. He just skipped the part where all of those things had happened because I had agreed to them. The next afternoon, Mason and Chloe came over. Chloe looked uncomfortable before she even got out of the car. Mason asked if we could go inside the shop. I almost said no out of pure irritation, which would have been stupid, so I opened it. The cabinet pieces were still across the center bench. There were boards on sawhorses near the back wall and a shop vacuum sitting where I had left it. Mason looked around and said, "This can be moved." "I know. Then what is the problem?" Chloe turned toward him. "Wait, did you actually ask Owen about this party?" Mason looked at me, then at her. "Not specifically." Chloe stared at him. He added, "We had his dad's party here." "Our dad," I said. "Fine, our dad, you know what I mean." Chloe said, "You told me the party was here." "I thought it was." She asked, "Because Owen told you that?" "No." Mason sounded embarrassed now instead of angry. "We'd already done one here. I didn't think this was some huge new thing." Chloe didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she asked me, "Is there any chance you would reconsider?" That was harder to answer. I looked around the shop. If I'm being truthful, I could have made it work. I could move the cabinet pieces into the back storage area. I could stack the lumber tighter. I could lock up smaller tools, cover the big ones, stop finishing work for a few days, sweep everything twice, bring in tables, move my truck, and spend most of the party making sure nobody wandered where they shouldn't. Then afterward I could put everything back and catch up on the work I had delayed. It would take a lot of hours. It would be annoying, but it was possible. I told Chloe I probably could get the building cleared enough. Mason immediately said, okay. So let's just do that. I hadn't finished. I said, I'm not doing it. His face changed. Chloe closed her eyes for a second. Mason said, you're seriously going to make us change everything when you admit it could work? I didn't agree to turn my shop into your venue. You're acting like I picked some random person's house. You did pick somebody else's property. That came out sharper than I intended. Mason shook his head. You've never cared when I've been out here before. This isn't you borrowing a trailer. So that's what this is about. Permission every single time. I said, for an engagement party with 72 people. Yes. Chloe looked at Mason. That seems pretty reasonable. She wasn't taking my side in some bigger family argument. She was just tired, I could see that. She had spent weeks planning food, decorations, and invitations based on a venue Mason had told her was handled. Now she had to redo part of it because he'd assumed instead of asking. They left after that. Mason barely said goodbye. That evening, Mom called me. She knew enough of the story by then. She asked, could you make it work this one time? I told her, probably. That wasn't the answer she expected. She said, then I don't understand why you're doing this. I walked into the shop while we talked. I actually picked up one of the unfinished chairs and moved it closer to the wall. Then I stood there holding the back of it. For maybe a minute, I started making the list in my head. Cabinet pieces to storage. Lumber moved, finishing delayed, tools covered, parking cleared, rental delivery, cleanup. Then another cleanup after 72 people went home. I put the chair back where it had been. I told Mom I chose to host Dad's dinner. Mason chose this one for me. She said he thought it was okay. I know, and now everyone has invitations. I know that too. Mom wasn't yelling. She just sounded disappointed. She said she thought I was being rigid. I told her maybe I was. Then we got off the phone. I didn't feel great afterward. Chloe hadn't done anything wrong. Neither had her parents. They had an engagement party coming up, and now the venue printed on every invitation wasn't available. For a while, I considered offering money toward another place. That would have been easy in one sense. I could have sent Mason something, called it my contribution, and reduced the argument. But every version of that ended with me covering part of the cost created by a decision I had never made, so I didn't. Instead, I texted Mason and told him that if they needed help loading decorations or moving supplies to a new venue, I would help. He didn't answer. Over the next few days, they looked at several places. One was a traditional event venue that had an opening but was much more than they wanted to spend. They checked a community hall that was available but didn't fit what Chloe wanted. Then they found a restaurant with a private event room. The room wasn't the rustic workshop setup Mason had pictured, but it came with tables, chairs, staff, food service, restrooms, and cleanup. The total was going to be around $2,400. Mason hated that number. He called me again after they got the quote. He said, do you understand we're basically paying for tables and chairs we could have had at your place? I said, you're paying for a venue. Using your shop would have been free. Neither of us said anything for a few seconds. He said, you know what I meant. I do. Mason complained that they were cutting back on some decorations to make the restaurant work. He also had to contact the rental company and change the order because the restaurant already supplied most of what they needed. Chloe sent updated location information to the guests. A couple of people apparently asked why the venue changed. Mason told them plans had changed. That was it. There was no announcement about me. I didn't want one. A few days before the party, Chloe texted and asked if my offer to help with decorations still stood. I said yes. Mason wasn't with her when I met her at their place. We loaded boxes into my truck and I helped take them to the restaurant. Chloe thanked me. Then she said, he's still mad. I figured. He really thought the workshop was already an option. I know. She looked at me like she was deciding whether to say more. Then she said, he should have asked. That was all. The engagement party was on Saturday. I went. For a few minutes before leaving home, I wondered if Mason would rather I stayed away, but I had an invitation and nobody had told me not to come. The restaurant room looked good. They had rearranged some of the decorations after dropping a few of their original ideas. The tables were already set. Food came out on time. Nobody had to haul chairs across my yard or figure out where 72 people were going to wash their hands. Chloe seemed happy. Mason was polite with me, but not warm. Later in the evening, when we happened to be standing near the bar at the same time, he looked around the room. He asked, you think this is better? I wasn't sure whether he was trying to argue again. I said, it looks good. He nodded. Then somebody called him over for a photo, and that ended the conversation. After the party, things between us were awkward for a while. We still saw each other. We still talked at family things, but Mason stopped dropping by my shop just because he was nearby. I didn't ban him from the property. I didn't need to. He simply became more careful. A few months later, he texted me about my utility trailer. He'd borrowed it enough times before that he used to treat the arrangement pretty casually. This time the message said, "Can I borrow the trailer Saturday?" I was using it Saturday to deliver part of a built-in, so I told him Sunday would work. He wrote back, "Sunday's good, thanks." Then he waited until Sunday. I had the trailer ready when he arrived.